Ever since Microsoft bought GitHub, there is the argument to be made that that team, the development team at Microsoft, focused on GitHub, has been doing some really amazing stuff with the product to help with the developer experience. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing one of those pieces of GitHub that is definitely something that you should think about, especially if you write code, and how we're seeing that push from writing code locally on your environment and pushing that to the cloud to more of a cloud native way of writing code. The specific products we're going to look at today are GitHub Codespaces and GitHub.dev. My focus will be on the GitHub Codespaces, but I'll also talk about GitHub.dev and what the differences are. If you haven't heard about those two, we're going to clear a couple of things in the video today. So, what is GitHub.dev? Before we go into that, let's talk about what GitHub really is about. I think if it's a refresher for anybody, most of us will know what GitHub is about. It allows you or developers to write code and to publish that code, and Git or GitHub manages that code. It's a version control system. That's just one of the functionalities. So if I have my code here, for example, this is just my profile page, I can make edits, host it, collaborate in the and version control that in the Git environment. But what that requires for you to do this is, if you really want to write code, we're talking about heavy, intensive code, you might need an IDE, you might need Visual Studio Code or PyCharm or some other IDE running on your local machine, needing resources, needing compute for that to work. And then you push that into GitHub. But what if you want to develop on your tablet, you want to develop on your mobile phone, you want to develop in the browser? And this is the need for having those IDEs running in the cloud, running natively in the environment, in the browser, that we're seeing here with the push. So one product that allows for that to happen is Visual or GitHub. Call it GitHub. Instead of going to github.com, you go to github.dev. Now, what is github.dev? Github.dev is essentially just uh, uh, an IDE that runs in the browser, nothing more. It's just an IDE that runs in the browser. So if I'm going to edit code or do some changes, instead of me downloading Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or VS Code and running locally machine on my machine, I can just access it on the browser, make my edits. If I want to edit this markdown, who is this? Uh, and then we can just make a comment here. This is through as an example, and you have that Visual Studio Code experience, but just natively in the browser. And you can commit things, you can push things, you can interact with it. But what I haven't done here is download anything on my machine. So my machine, my desktop could be very lightweight, and I could still have a developer experience. Now, this is great. And you might say, but why would then somebody care about code spaces in this case if I can do everything here? The only difference is you can write code, you can edit code, but as many people would know, there is more to coding than just writing lines of text, right? You have to run that, you have to debug that. But if we come in here and we try to run this, you're not allowed to do that with GitHub.dev. So here, it's disabled to run this. It actually tells you you're gonna have to clone the repo locally, open it on your desktop. And what does that mean? You need an IDE on your desktop, and you can run this locally, because to run the code, it needs compute. It needs that compute resources to actually process it. But this defeats the purpose if we want to do everything in the cloud, cloud natively. Because the point is, I don't want to be running this on my local machine. If I'm developing on a tablet, or my machine just has 4 gig of RAM, and I don't, and 4 gig is, I'm sure people would scream at that. But just imagine you really have a low powered machine, but you still want to do development or collaborate, then installing an IDE on your machine might not be what you want. And so this is where code spaces come into play. So now we understand GitHub.dev and what's used for. It definitely has its place for just quickly editing files. But if you're going to be running and debugging and actually executing applications, this is not going to work. So this is where we're going to have to go back and look at GitHub code spaces. So code spaces, and let me duplicate this so I can have my other page back. So what Codespaces does is, and it says it here, it's currently limited to paid teams. So We'll talk about what it is and try to log in. If not, you'll get a good idea of what it is, because we're just doing this live. So Codespaces allows you to have that cloud experience, development environment. Not too long ago, we talked about Gitpod, which kind of as playing in the same space. There might be differences here and there, but if you want to look for an analogy, Gitpod.io would be what this will compare with. Where as a developer, you can connect to your GitHub account, pull a branch into Codespaces, which gives you an IDE based on Visual Studio Code. You develop, you run, you execute, you debug. You can actually take a link and share it with other people so they can see your application almost live without you having to have anything installed locally on your machine. And so you can go from machine to machine. Any machine you grab your hands on, you can use that as your development environment. How amazing is that? So this is what it does. It's backed by Visual Studio Code. There is a desktop, which is Visual Studio Code, as would expect, and then there is the browser version, which is if you want to just come into the browser in Codespaces and do development, then that happens. It gives you up to 64 GB of memory to play with. So if you're going to be executing Node.js, Angular, React, Python, you name it, you have pretty good memory to work with. I know for sure that my development machine, or some of my development machines that I have, don't have up to 64 GB of memory to play with, right? And you're getting that just browser based and up to 32 cores as well. This is I wouldn't call this production great, but that's some really good memory there to play with, and it all runs in the browser. It gives you up to 16 cores. I think it talks about that standard def environment. And this could be key, right? So thinking about this whole idea of environment as code. So how I develop in my environment, can I give it to the next developer to have my exact environment so they can recreate things, they can debug, they can troubleshoot. We all know the proverbial saying of, oh, but it works in my environment, right? When things don't work in prod, the answer is, well, it works in my environment. Sure, the difference is environments might be different, and just maintaining those environments can bog down teams. I've seen teams literally come to a grinding halt, because somebody sees an issue in prod, no one can reproduce it in dev, and but there is a difference somewhere, right? And trying to figure that out could be a challenge. So, powerful browsing experience. You can set up port and things like that. Where this is even looking like is you have an application on a specific port, you can basically from dev expose that application to the web and have a link that you can share with other people. That's pretty promising and pretty cool. Um, then there are tabs and spaces. There are a lot of things that can be done. All the formatting that you expect um, from the local experience, you can have all of that in the browser. How you set up your specific shortcuts and the little different configurations that developers would like to have in their development environment. You can set all of that up as well, and then all the extensions, right, that you have in your local development environment. Those are all available there with Jupyter notebooks, which is something from a data science perspective becoming more and more common, and Docker and Python and you name it. And then there are builds, and it's a pay as you go. I think it's a utility based model for this. So really elevating and speeding up that developer experience is what GitHub Codespaces is about. I really could see this changing how teams have their development workflows of having to issue computers, having to issue machines, and go through onboarding new developers and giving them documentations on how to set things up and what dependencies to download and what things to install. Those things might go away. You just simply get a new developer on your team. The workspace or the code spaces has been set up. They log in and off they go. And what this might mean for not just having in-house teams, but bringing in contractors, bringing in volunteers, bringing in other folks who just quickly come in and troubleshoot or solve problems. That idea of collaboration might really change because of the flexibility that something like this provides. I know I'm kind of thinking here a little bit on a higher level, but the promise here for what this kind of flexibility might do is definitely there. It reminds me of what Snowflake did for the database world, where in the past you had to install a database and manage it and do backups and do sizing and all of that to the point where you just log into Snowflake, you just have a database, and the whole world of data analytics was turned upside down in what people could do and the kind of problems they can solve. When you think about it from a development experience, this whole idea of browser-based, pay-as-you-go, utility-based, a service that you can just use without worrying about all the configurations underneath, similar to what Snowflake did in solving for data warehousing and data management. This seems to be kind of a lot of this industry is kind of going down that path, right? That's what I see a lot happening. So let's go back here again. I haven't tried this. Here there is an overview. It probably will not let me get started with. So let's actually go quick start. So there are a couple of things here in terms of the quick start, and that would be a follow-up video that we're gonna have to do to jump right in and do a setup of a detailed demo and setup of code spaces. Part of what's holding here is it requires a paid teams or organizations, which as you can imagine, I'm doing this from my free account, so that's a hold. But just to summarize, and the two takeaways from this is the difference between GitHub.dev versus GitHub Codespaces. Why is GitHub.dev relevant? I think we understand that. It just gives you that browser experience for developing code without having to install things locally. That's what really GitHub.dev would give you, or give your team. The limitations with that being you cannot run or debug code with GitHub.dev. Now switch over to GitHub to Git code or to Codespaces. It gives you that developer experience again in the browser based on Visual Studio Code. But in addition to that, it gives you the necessary compute for you to develop and run and debug and actually even deploy applications and get a link to the application that you can share, and somebody can actually just run that application without you having to run it locally and do all of that. So the promise definitely is there. The big difference is what does this compare to? It compares to something like Gitpod, which I've also done a video about and talked about that as well. So once I get access to this and get in, we're gonna do a demo and more detailed a walkthrough on how you can set this up with Python or with HTML, whatever kind of code you want to set this up. We're gonna walk through on how to do all of that. All right, guys. So hopefully this was helpful. Check out GitHub.dev or Git or Codespaces. Very interesting as developers or technologies to have this in your tool belt. GitHub is a very it's a marquee product in the development space these days. It's just had to be a true technology professionals, a developer, architect, whatever it is, without having some exposure to Git and to GitHub as a whole. And so this team from Microsoft has really been doing a lot of exciting things. So this is Codespaces and GitHub.dev. Hopefully this was helpful. Check it out. Leave comments below if you have any comments. We'll be more than happy to check them out as well. If you have any topics you want me to take a look at and to make a video, a quick demo, or discuss about it, don't hesitate to let me know in the comment section below, or email me directly to as well. I'll be more than happy to take a look at that. As always, you've been very awesome watching to the end. I have been through, and I'll see you in the